In an excellent example of bad assumptions making bad laws, the Equality Act will codify prejudice, discrimination, and inequality, making things worse rather than better. We'll look at how next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Well, hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here once again with the Constitution Study, where we read, study, and teach the rising generation to be free. I'm glad you could join me today. I want to thank those who can help me. I want to point you over to the website, constitutionstudy.com, as you can find out everything we're doing here at the Constitution Study. It's also where you can ask questions, make suggestions, comment, generally provide feedback. I appreciate those who are supporting the work that we're doing, whether it's Mark and Carol Murphy through the use of their song and the band Rebel North that I use in the bump music, or people that are asking questions or just contributing, spreading the word, which I'd love you to do. Spread the word of what we're doing here and the studying of the Constitution. Hope you'll get to see you in person. I'm trying to get scheduled at more events and speaking opportunities so we can see each other face to face. If you have an idea, a place you'd like to go, head over to the website and let me know. Okay, so let's get into, as I like to call it, the Inequality Act. It seems like it's almost perfect. If you look at the name of a bill and you invert it, that's generally what you're going to get. So, yeah, it's pretty sad to say, but I'm not surprised in today's political climate that there are quite a few representatives in Congress that have signed on to this particular piece of legislation. Nowadays, legislation that claims to support the rights of the weak by infringing on the rights of those who disagree with them seem to be a siren song in Washington, and our state capitals just don't seem to be able to resist either. Now, let's set aside the rhetoric and the claims of what this legislation will do. Let's look at the actual language and decide for ourselves. Now, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. Now, the bill states that its purpose, its reason for being, is to prohibit discrimination based on sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation. Now, if this is true, then the language of the bill must protect the rights of all persons regardless of their categorization by this legislation. Of course, the bill includes other reasons as a reason for being, but we'll keep an eye out for those, see if they pop up as we're going through. Give us a clue as to what else they're trying to do. So let's start with the findings. Okay, Congress claims there are reasons why we need this legislation, why they need to pass this. So let's take a look. Quote. Come on, give me the... There we go. Okay, a little bit of technical issue there. Okay. Discrimination can occur on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical condition of an individual, as well as because of sex-based stereotypes. Each of these factors alone can serve as a basis for discrimination, and each is a form of sex discrimination. A single instance of sex discrimination may have more than one basis. For example, discrimination against a married same-sex couple could be based on the sex stereotype that marriage should only be between heterosexual couples, the sexual orientation of the two individuals of the couple, or both. Discrimination against a pregnant lesbian could be based on her sex, her sexual orientation, her pregnancy, or on her basis for multiple factors. So, Congress claims that discrimination can occur based on many different factors, and that multiple factors can be excused for a single act of discrimination. So, to do justice, we need to get a good definition of this discrimination that Congress is so worried about. So let's take a look. Discrimination by Merriam-Webster is defined as prejudiced or prejudicial outlook, action, or treatment, racial discrimination. The act, practice, or an instance of discriminating categorically rather than individually. The quality or power of finally distinguishing the film defined by those with discrimination. The act of making or perceiving a difference. The act of discriminating discriminating bloodhound scent discrimination. And psychology, the process by which two stimuli differing in some aspect are responded to differently. All right, so based on this definition, we can really break this down into two main definitions for discrimination. One is recognizing a difference, and the second is a prejudicial or a group-based view or action based on that difference. So if we go back to what the reason is from the legislation, did you notice something? See, the only examples of discrimination listed, bring that back up, are against homosexuals. See, I thought this legislation was to prohibit discrimination based on, among other things, sexual orientation. Aren't there other sexual orientations than homosexual? Has Congress prejudicially decided that homosexuals and traditional heterosexuals and traditional couples are never discriminated against? Well, what about the owner of the Masterpiece Cake Shop in Colorado? See, the Supreme Court found that the state of Colorado discriminated against him. And what about the countless others of florists, videographers, t-shirt designers, people in medical profession who have had their cases not heard by a top court yet, but are being discriminated against because of their preferences? Is forcing them to create and to participate in activities they find objectionable now a legitimate form of indenture? In other words, if you open a store or you provide a service, can you be forced to do work against your will because Congress is determined not to do so as discrimination while they discriminate against you? See, if Congress really wants to prevent discrimination, why don't they list heterosexual, opposite-sex couple, and others who are currently suffering discrimination in the name of non-discrimination? Also notice, Congress claims that such discrimination could be based on the sex stereotype that marriage should only be between heterosexual couples. Well, what is a stereotype? Something conforming to a fixed or general pattern, especially a standardized mental picture that is held in common by members of a group and that represent an oversimplified opinion, prejudiced attitude, or uncritical judgment. I like that one. See, there are groups who hold to the common picture that marriage is between one man and one woman. It has only been that way for thousands of years of recorded history. But to call that oversimplified or prejudiced or uncritical ignores that history. It ignores the fact that the vast majority of Americans, based on history, prefer or support opposite sex marriage. You see, before same-sex marriage was imposed on the nation by the Supreme Court, that, by the way, is a whole nother discussion, the people in a majority of the states that had voted on the idea rejected the idea of same-sex marriage being legally recognized. Yet now Congress determines, oh, that's prejudicial. No, that's a preference. That's not saying that someone should be treated poorly because of them. It's whether or not, how are we going to define words? Again, if Congress really wanted to eliminate discrimination, I would think they could start by not using such discriminatory and derogatory language in their legislation. So let's go on and look at some of the examples that Congress gives for this discrimination. See, Congress's findings include many, many statements about discrimination with no evidence or examples to support their assertions. See, are we merely to accept the word of politicians, a group pretty much best known for the propensity to lie, that these acts are not only happening, but are rampant enough to warrant federal intervention? See, Congress says lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, referred to as LGBT, people commonly experience discrimination in securing access to public accommodations, including restaurants, senior centers, stores, places or establishments that provide entertainment, healthcare facilities, shelters, government offices, youth service providers, including adoption and foster care providers, and transportation. Forms of discrimination include the exclusion or denial of entry, unequal or unfair treatment, harassment, and violence. The discrimination prevents the full participation of LGBT people in society and disrupts the free flow of commerce. Women also have faced discrimination in many establishments, such as stores and restaurants and places or establishments that provide other goods or services, such as entertainment or transportation, including sexual harassment, differential pricing for substantially similar products and services, and denial of services because they are pregnant or breastfeeding. Regular and ongoing discrimination against LGBT people, as well as women, in accessing public accommodations contributes to negative social and economic outcomes. And in the case of public accommodations operated by state and local governments, abridges individuals' constitutional rights. Both LGBT people and women face widespread discrimination in employment and various services, including by entities that receive federal financial assistance, discrimination by state and local governments on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity in employment, housing, and public accommodation, and in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance, violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. In many circumstances, such discrimination also violates other constitutional rights, such as those of liberty and privacy under the due process clauses of the 14th Amendment. Individuals who are LGBT or are perceived to be LGBT have been subjected to a history of and pattern of persistent, widespread, and pervasive discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity by both private sector, federal, state, and local government actors, including in employment, housing, and public accommodations, and in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. An explicit and comprehensive national solution is needed to address such discrimination, including the full range of remedies available under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. LGBT people often face discrimination when seeking to rent or purchase housing, as well as in every other aspect of obtaining and maintaining housing. LGBT people in same-sex relationships are often discriminated against when two names associated with one gender appear on a housing application, and transgender people often encounter discrimination when credit checks or inquiries reveal a former name. As a result of the absence of explicit prohibitions against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, credit applicants who are LGBT or perceived to be LGBT have unequal opportunities to establish credit. LGBT people can experience being denied a mortgage, credit card, student loan, or many other types of credit simply because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Quite a list here. We have no less than 8 specific claims of discrimination without one single example or referenceable documentation. If this discrimination is so rampant, why does Congress not provide a single solitary example? And if this type of discrimination is a violation of the 14th Amendment and the Equal Opportunity Protection Act, why has it not been prosecuted? If the law already exists guaranteeing equal protection under it, why is the law not being applied? And since Congress lists federal programs and services where LGBT and women are being discriminated against, why do they not pass legislation requiring the prosecution of claims of discrimination in federal services? Congress oversees those services. Again, I cannot see what these congressmen are thinking, but it seems they are much more interested in creating a new protected class and elevating them above the rest of Americans. Not exactly equal protection under the law, is it? Now, they do occasionally reference evidence of discrimination, yet they provide no data to support it. Nothing that can be checked or verified, and they ignore basic statistical science to make their point. National surveys, including a study commissioned by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, show that housing discrimination against LGBT people is very prevalent. For instance, when same-sex couples inquire about housing that is available for rent, they are less likely to receive positive responses from landlords. A national match pair testing investigation found that nearly 1/2 of same-sex couples face adverse differential treatment when seeking elder housing. Accordingly to other studies, transgender people have half the home ownership rates of non-transgender people, and about 1 in 5 transgender people experience homelessness. Numerous studies demonstrate that LGBT people, especially transgender people and women, are economically disadvantaged and at higher risk for poverty compared with other groups of people. For example, older women in same-sex couples have twice the poverty rate of older different-sex couples. Numerous studies document the shortage of qualified and available homes for the 43,700 youth in child welfare system and the negative outcomes of many youth who live in group care as opposed to a loving home who age out without a permanent family. Although same-sex couples are 7 times more likely to foster or adopt than different-sex couples, many child placing agencies refuse to serve same-sex couples and LGBT individuals. This has resulted in a reduction of the pool of qualified and available homes for youth in the child welfare system who need placement on a temporary or permanent basis. Barring discrimination in foster care and adoption will increase the number of homes available to foster children waiting for foster and adoptive families. LGBT youth are overrepresented in the foster care system by at least a factor of 2 and report twice the rate of poor treatment while in care compared to their non-LGBT counterparts. Youth in foster care have a higher average number of placement, higher likelihood of living in a group home, and higher rates of hospitalization for emotional reasons and juvenile justice involvement than their non-LGBT peers because of the high level of bias and discrimination that they face and the difficulty of finding affirming foster parents. Further, due to the physical distance from the friends and family, traumatic experiences, and potentially unstable living situations, all youth involved with child welfare are at risk for being targeted by traffickers seeking to exploit children. Barring discrimination in child welfare services will ensure improved treatment and outcome for LGBT foster children. What are these national surveys? What? They say they're there. Which ones? Point to them. Link to them. Name them. What numerous studies is Congress using to justify this legislation? The bill claims that LGBT youth are overrepresented in the foster care system, but they provide no data to back it up. And did the analysis of their claims control for other factors like emotional disorders or coming from a broken family? How can we tell without the data to look at ourselves? Were these alleged acts of discrimination caused by the fact that those requesting services were LGBT? Or was that simply assumed to be the reason? We have to understand there's a difference in correlation and causation. Congress then goes on to invent whole new rights to show that there's discrimination. The right to an impartial jury of one's peers and the reciprocal right of jury service are fundamental to the free and democratic system of justice in the United States and are based in the Bill of Rights. There is, however, an unfortunate and long documented history in the United States of attorneys discriminating against LGBT individuals or those perceived to be LGBT in jury selection. Failure to bar preemptory challenges based on the actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity of an individual not only erodes a fundamental right, duty, and obligation of being a citizen of the United States, but also unfairly creates a second class of citizenship for LGBT victims, witnesses, plaintiffs, and defendants. We have a right, under certain circumstances, to a trial by a jury of our peers. We have a right when it's a criminal trial, but there is no reciprocal right to serve on a jury. As the name implies, jury duty is a duty. It's not a right. If we were to exercise the so-called right to serve on a jury, wouldn't that be at the expense of the defendant's right to an impartial jury? If my experience or opinions are prejudicial to the defense, regardless of why I have them, do I have the right to serve on that jury over their objection? No, this is another attempt to create a right for a protected class by infringing on the rights of all Americans. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't any discrimination against people with non-traditional views of sex and marriage relationships. It happens. What is evident, not only from the lack of evidence for their grandiose statements and their lack of scientific rigor with their statistics, is that they have no proof that this is a pervasive problem in America, specifically a systemic problem. Worse than that, many of the examples I use show they wish to discriminate against those who do not agree, who do not wish to support these lifestyles. Otherwise, why would they not push to enforce existing law? Why don't they enforce the law rather than inventing fake rights for the LGBT community? As I said, I'm not saying there is not instances of discrimination, but we have to understand we are supposedly live in a free country Do we or do we not have the right to live as we see fit? And if the LGBT community want to live the way they want, they can't force other people to say they agree with them. See, after the findings section, the legislation goes on to list where in the federal law Congress wishes to add sex, including sexual orientation and gender identity, as a specifically protected class. You will not only have to allow others to act that way, but support and promote those lifestyles if you don't want to run afoul of federal law. In other words, if you disagree with those in the LGBT community, you can be discriminated against and your rights trampled because your representatives in Congress say so. See, rather than elimination of discrimination, this bill is attempting to codify in federal law discrimination of everybody but LGBT. See, we have to understand the difference between discrimination as in noting a difference and discrimination as in treating a people badly because of that. The difference between recognizing a difference and making a logical decision of whether I want to support it or promote it and treating an entire group of people violating their rights because of the group they tend to identify with. See, this is an attempt to codify discrimination in the name of eliminating it. They are creating, this Supposed Clause Equality Act is creating inequality. It's creating discrimination. If you don't want to see anyone denied their rights, I don't. I don't want to see people denied their rights, whether I agree with their lifestyles or not. But it's their rights I'm worried about. If we are to live in a free country, we must allow others to disagree with us. We must. That means other people need to allow us to disagree with them as well. If Congress wants to enforce the 14th Amendment, then they need to make sure everyone's rights are being protected, not just a new special group. Amendment 14, Section 1 says, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. But what are they doing? Congress is making law which is abridging the privileges and immunities of the majority of the citizens of the United States in favor of a special group. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. But isn't that what they're doing here? Aren't they depriving people who own shops, provide services of their due process, of their businesses without due process of law? Are they not creating a system of unequal protection under the law if my right to a jury trial only exists as long as I don't, I don't happen to have an LGBT person that wants to serve on the jury? See, we have a right not only to our lives, but to the products and services we create. We have the right to sell goods and services, but we do not have the right to buy them from somebody else. I have the right to create goods and sell them. You do not have the right to buy them from me. This is a myth. I have the right to associate with whoever I want. You have the right to associate with whoever I want. And that includes the right not to associate with whoever you want, without federal interference. If our desire to associate is not supported by a significant number of others, it will wither and die. But to tell people they must work for others is indentured servitude at best, slavery at worst. The only place where any government should be making sure there is no discrimination is with the services they provide. If Congress is correct and can provide evidence that the federal government is discriminating against people due to their sex or sexual orientation, they should fix that rather than dictating to everyday Americans who they can and cannot do business with. With all the federal regulations not only banning such discrimination, but actually giving special preference to those protected classes, I doubt very much there's much federal discrimination against those in the LGBT community. Rather, there appears to be a lot of discrimination in their favor. In fact, if we think about this rationally, there are times when discrimination is not only allowed, but required. Remember discrimination, the act of making or perceiving a difference? If recognizing a difference in someone is necessary to protect the rights of others, should we make such discriminations? We discriminate by sex in public facilities where people may need to expose their bodies, such as restrooms and locker rooms. At least we used to, and we did this in order to protect others. But more and more these protections are being swept away. And in fact, we did this primarily to protect women. Look at how often this legislation says women are discriminated against. It's trying to tear down discrimination protections for women, to protect them from men who have voyeuristic intent or worse. See, we discriminate by sex in many athletic programs because we recognize the scientifically proven fact that in general, men's bodies are faster and stronger than women's. Yes, I said in general. There are examples of women who are faster and stronger than me, but that does not mean I should be allowed to compete in a group where I am much more likely to dominate. Is that fair to those who are competing against someone with a biological advantage? What you are seeing are protections, especially for women, being destroyed in the name of a small yet vocal group who disagree with them. Is that equal protection under the law? Is that equality? As I said, I do not wish to see anyone's rights violated. Anyone. However, Americans today, especially our elected aristocracy, have a warped and twisted view of rights. They seem to believe it's okay to punish those who disagree with them. They also act if it's okay to violate an individual's rights if it's beneficial to the right group. In short, the people we've hired to protect our rights act as if they are in Washington only to protect some of us and some of our rights. Don't you think it's about time we hire a better class of agent to do our business? If we really want equality, then we need to protect the rights of everyone. Creating different classes of people is not all men being created equal. Giving different groups the power to infringe on the rights of others is not equal protection under the law. We should treat the Equality Act the same way it treats the rights of a majority of Americans. We should throw it in the trash bin where it belongs. So I hope that made you think. I like asking. I hope that makes you think, because that's what this is about. Just because the law is titled the Equality Act doesn't mean it's actually going to make things equal. Now, I agree. If there is discrimination against LGBT, whether you agree with them or not, that's wrong. If their rights are being infringed. But what we see here is not. We don't see any evidence of rights being infringed. We don't see any data we can analyze. We see really questionable statistical analytics. And we see them creating whole new rights out of whole cloth. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say you have a right to serve on a jury. But you see, they want to make a point. And Americans' general ignorance about the Constitution means a lot of people are going to go along with this. And that's really sad. Because what you're going to see is more and more of our rights being eroded because some group can get a group of congressmen all riled up to say, really, you need to give us special rights. It's special rights that's tearing America apart. It's special rights that are destroying the rule of law. And I think it's special rights that are going to end up with an America that lives in tyranny rather than in liberty. So again, I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it thought-provoking. As always, head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. Read, study, teach, learn what the Constitution actually says. Look at the legislation they're talking about. Don't just read the headlines. And once again, I hope I will see you again the next time when we get together on the Constitution Study. Have a great day.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through